didn't fight them when they told me to leave. I didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't beg. I just stood there in the kitchen holding my keys, and I looked at my mother's face, the one she made when she was disappointed in something that had nothing to do with me. And I thought, this is the last time I will ever feel small in this house. I was 19. It was October and the maple in the front yard had already gone red. I remember that because when I walked out the front door, a handful of leaves came loose and scattered across the driveway, and my father didn't even come out to watch me go. Just my mother, arms crossed, standing on the porch, watching me the way you watch a dog you've decided to give away. My name is Isabel. And this is the story of what happened 20 years later when they came back. I should tell you what I did wrong according to them. I got engaged to a man named Wesley. He was 26, I was 19, and he worked in logistics, warehouse management, scheduling, nothing glamorous. His family was from Shreveport. His father had done some time in the 90s for something my parents never let me forget. His last name wasn't the right kind of name, didn't come with land or legacy or a country club membership. My father had built a small empire in commercial real estate in Charlotte. Not a dynasty. He would have needed a different last name for that. But enough for a house with a circular driveway, enough for private school tuition. Enough for him to believe that the company he'd spent 30 years building was a kind of inheritance he could control. And control was the thing. That's what I've come to understand now. It was never about Wesley. It was never about love or judgment or protecting me. It was about a succession plan, and I was refusing to cooperate. My father had always intended to pass the business to someone he trusted completely. He had no sons. He had me and my younger sister, Fiona, who was 16 and obedient and still believed that compliance was the same as love. He needed me to marry someone he'd selected, someone useful. There was a man, I'll call him the candidate, whose family owned a development firm in Raleigh, and my father had been engineering that introduction for 2 years. He never said it outright. He didn't have to. My mother was fluent in saying things sideways. Isabel, don't you think it's worth getting to know all your options before you commit to anything? Wesley seems nice, sweetheart, but nice isn't the same as suited. You're so young, you don't know yet what you'll want at 35. When I told them Wesley had proposed and I'd said yes, the sideway talk stopped. My father sat across from me at the dinner table and said, flat and even, if you marry that man, I won't be able to keep you in my will. You understand that this is a business, and business decisions have to be made. I told him I understood. I didn't understand, not fully, I was 19. But I understood enough. I understood that I was being given a choice between my future and their approval, and that if I chose wrong, I would have to live with it. I chose Wesley. 2 weeks after the engagement announcement, my mother called me into the kitchen and slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. It was an attorney's letter, a formal notice that I had been removed from the family estate trust. There was also a smaller envelope with $300 in it. My mother's handwriting on the outside, for transition expenses. You can take your clothes, she said, and your car. Your father is keeping it on the insurance through the end of the month. That was how it happened. Not a screaming fight. Not a screaming fight. Not a door slammed. Just paperwork and $300 and the red maple in the driveway letting go of its leaves. Wesley and I got married the following spring at the courthouse in Mecklenburg County. His mother cried. My side of the room had his aunt, who'd driven up from Shreveport and kept pressing my hand and saying, I'm so glad he found you, honey. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment off South Boulevard. I had finished 2 years of college before the fallout, and I went back part-time while working as a billing coordinator for a physical therapy practice. It wasn't what I'd imagined for myself. I'd been pre-law, vaguely, the way you're vague about things when you assume someone else is paying. Now, I had to be specific. I'll be honest about those first 2 years. They were hard in ways that embarrassed me at the time. Hard because I'd grown up insulated. Hard because I didn't know how to read a lease or negotiate a salary or understand why our tax return was so much smaller than I expected. I had to learn everything from scratch, not dramatically, not in a single montage moment, just slowly and with a lot of mistakes that cost us money we didn't have. Wesley was steady. That's the word. He wasn't romantic in the way movies train you to expect, but he was there, consistently there. And when I got frustrated or ashamed or scared, he'd sit with it until I came out the other side. He wasn't ambitious the way my father was ambitious, meaning he didn't need to win against someone to feel like he was succeeding. He just worked and saved and showed up. By the time I was 23, I had my paralegal certification and a full-time position at a mid-sized litigation firm in uptown Charlotte. I was good at it, better than I'd expected. Something about the work clicked. The research, the document review, the way a good argument has a spine you can feel when you read it. I started thinking about law school seriously. I took the LSA to 24, scored in the 88th percentile, applied to 4 schools and got into 2. We made the decision together. Wesley found a position with a distribution company in the new city and I enrolled. I won't compress 3 years of law school into a paragraph and pretend it was easy. It wasn't. First year almost broke me. I called Wesley from the library at 11 at night more times than I can count, but I graduated. I passed the bar on the first attempt. I joined a firm specializing in corporate litigation, and I was good at that too. By 32, I was a senior associate. By 34, I was being talked about for partner. I had not spoken to my parents in 15 years. Fiona reached out occasionally. Carefully, the way you navigate a minefield you've memorized. She sent a card when I passed the bar, just a Hallmark card, no return address, a single line in her handwriting. I'm proud of you. I mean it. I kept it. I still have it somewhere. She called me once, about 8 years in, to tell me that our father had had a minor cardiac event, not life-threatening. He'd recovered fully. She wasn't calling to guilt me into contact. I could tell she just felt like I should know, and then felt guilty for even making the call. How's he doing? I asked. He's fine. Stubborn as always. And Mom? You know how she is. I did know. I said goodbye, told Fiona I loved her, and let the call end. I didn't reach out to my parents. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said in the only language my father ever understood, by leaving. Wesley and I bought our house in 2019. 4 bedrooms, detached garage, a yard with a real oak tree in the back. We talked about children loosely, the way you talk about things you want but haven't committed to yet. Life had a pace to it that felt good. Not perfect. We had our hard years, a stretch in our early 30s where we were both exhausted and not quite reaching each other. But we came back from it. We chose each other again, quietly, without announcement. I made partner in 2022, the youngest in the firm's 40-year history. My name went on the door. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in my office reviewing a contract dispute, commercial lease, the tenant claiming constructive eviction, the kind of case I'd handled 100 times, when my assistant knocked and said there was a woman on the line asking for me by my maiden name. I don't use my maiden name professionally. I use Wesley's last name. The fact that she'd asked for my maiden name told me exactly who it was before I even picked up. My mother's voice had gotten older. Thinner somehow, like the years had drawn something out of it. Isabel. A pause. It's your mother. I said nothing for a moment. I was looking at the contract on my desk and thinking, absurdly, that I needed to finish my notes on section 14 before my 3 o'clock. I know, I said. She asked if we could meet. She and my father, they were coming to Charlotte. They'd already planned it. I got the sense, before she'd called me, which told me something about the nature of the meeting. They needed something. People who have something to offer call with an open hand. People who need something call with a plan. I asked her what it was about. She said it was complicated and she'd rather explain in person. I said I had time on Thursday at noon. I named a restaurant that was close to my office. Public. Neutral. Not a place with any memory attached to it. She agreed without pushing back. which meant the need was real. I told Wesley that night. We were in the kitchen and I was making pasta, and I just said it plainly. My mother called. They want to meet Thursday. He set down his glass and looked at me carefully. How do you feel? He said. I don't know yet, I said, which was true. Curious, mostly. Do you want me to come? I thought about it. No, but thank you. He nodded and didn't push. That's what I mean about Wesley. I spent the next 2 days not overthinking it or trying not to. I knew what I was walking into. I'd been in enough conference rooms with enough people who needed something they weren't ready to ask for directly. I knew the body language. I knew how to wait. Thursday was gray and cool. I wore my charcoal blazer and got there 5 minutes early and was already seated when they came in. They were older, obviously. 20 years is 20 years. My father was 71 now, and he moved carefully, with the deliberate attention to his body that comes from surviving one health scare and not wanting another. My mother was 68 and still held herself the same way, upright, composed. But there was something around the eyes that hadn't been there before. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the specific fatigue of a story that hadn't resolved the way she'd expected. My father shook my hand. My mother reached toward me, not quite a hug, and I met it the same way, not quite a hug. We ordered. We made the surface conversation first because that's how it's done. The weather, the drive up, the restaurant. My father remarked on the neighborhood, that it had changed. I agreed that it had. Then my father folded his hands on the table and looked at me with the expression he used for closing a deal, and I understood we were moving to the actual agenda. You know your grandfather's trust finally matured, he said. I didn't know this specifically, but I'd had a rough sense that it was coming. My grandfather, my father's father, had been a careful, old-fashioned man who'd set up a family trust in the 1980s with terms that were specific and somewhat archaic. The trust was structured to distribute assets to legitimate heirs upon the youngest living descendant of the second generation reaching the age of 40. That youngest descendant was Fiona. She had just turned 40 in January. I'm aware of how Grandpa Herb's trust was structured, I said. My father nodded. Then you know that the distribution requires sign-off from all documented heirs, including you. There it was. I kept my face even. I was removed from the estate, I said. From our estate, he said. From our estate, he said. Not from your grandfather's trust. He never amended his documents after. He paused. After things changed between us, which means legally you're still a named beneficiary. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the table. So you need my signature, I said. To release the full distribution, yes. Without it, the trustee has to hold the contested portion in escrow, potentially for years, while probate sorts it out. It delays everything for everyone. How much is the contested portion? He told me the number. It was not a small number. I took a sip of water. I set the glass down. I'll need to review the trust documents, I said. Have your attorney send them to my office. My father blinked. I don't think he'd expected that. He'd probably expected emotion, anger, or old grief, or the wounded compliance of a 19-year-old who'd never had any power in this family. He hadn't factored in 20 years. Of course, he said. My mother reached across the table then and touched my wrist. Her hand was cold. Isabel, she said, we've missed you, whatever happened before. I'll review the documents, I said gently. That's where we need to start. I spent 2 weeks reviewing everything. I pulled my grandfather's original trust documents from 1987. I reviewed the amendment history. There were 2 minor amendments, neither of which removed my name. I had a trust and estates colleague look at it independently and tell me what I already suspected. My father was right. I was still a named beneficiary. My share of the trust was substantial. But I also found something else. In the process of document review, my colleague noticed an irregularity in the trust's investment accounts, a series of management fee withdrawals over the past 11 years that were difficult to trace. Not dramatic, Not obvious fraud, but the kind of quiet erosion that someone comfortable and trusted could execute over a long time without anyone looking closely enough. My father had been the trustee since my grandfather died in 2013. My grandfather had trusted him completely. They'd been close, genuinely close, and the trust documents gave the trustee broad discretionary authority. I spent 3 days going through a decade of statements. When I was done, I knew what had happened. The management fees were being routed to a holding company my father had set up in 2014, 1 year after he became trustee. The holding company had no external clients, no activity besides receiving these payments. It had been used to quietly shift approximately $800,000 out of the trust over 11 years. My share, the share he needed my signature to release, would have been around $400,000. He'd been taking from the trust for a decade, and now he needed my signature to close everything out cleanly, to make the final distribution and dissolve the accounts before anyone looked too closely. I sat at my desk for a long time after I understood this. Outside my window, the city was doing what cities do, moving, indifferent, continuous. I thought about the kitchen table in Charlotte, the folded attorney's letter, the $300 in the envelope with my mother's handwriting. I thought about Wesley's aunt pressing my hand at the courthouse. I thought about Fiona's card. I'm proud of you. I mean it. I picked up the phone. I called Fiona first. She answered on the second ring, and when I explained what I'd found, she was quiet for so long that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Fiona. I'm here, she said. I need a second. Take your time. Does he know that you know? Not yet. Another silence. What are you going to do? I'm going to handle it properly, I said, but I wanted you to know first because this affects you too. The money that's missing, that's your inheritance as much as mine. She cried a little. I let her. Then she said, What do you need from me? Just be ready, and don't call them before I do. I didn't call my father. I sent a letter, formal, through my office on firm letterhead, addressed to him and CC'd to the trustee bank and to a probate attorney I'd identified in their county. The letter stated that I had completed my review of the trust documents, that I had identified irregularities in the account history consistent with self-dealing and breach of fiduciary duty, that I was prepared to bring this to the North Carolina State Bar's Trust Account Oversight Committee and to pursue a civil claim unless we could reach a resolution that made all named beneficiaries whole. I was not asking for an apology. I was not asking for a relationship. I was asking for the math to work out correctly. His attorney called my office 2 days later. 3 weeks of back and forth followed. My father didn't attend the calls. He let his attorney speak for him, which was, in its own way, a kind of answer about who he'd always been. In the end, he agreed to restore the full amount to the trust from personal assets before the final distribution. My share, Fiona's share, a smaller share to a cousin we barely known, all of it distributed correctly, with the trustee bank overseeing the final accounting. I signed the release documents on a Wednesday morning. It took about 4 minutes. I wired a portion of my distribution to a scholarship fund at the university where I'd done my first 2 years of college. I kept the rest. Wesley and I talked about what to do with it. We didn't need it urgently. We were fine. And eventually put most of it into a donor-advised fund we've been building slowly for a few years. Causes we believed in. Nothing dramatic. My mother called one more time, about a month after everything was settled. She didn't mention the trust. She asked how I was doing. She said she hoped we could find a way to, and here she paused, looking for the right word, reconnect. I let her finish. Then I said, Mom, I've spent 20 years building a life. It's a good life. I worked for it, and Wesley worked for it, and it has nothing to do with the name I was born with or the house I grew up in or what Dad needed me to be. She started to say something. I'm not angry, I said, and that was true. Anger had burned off a long time ago, sometime in my late 20s, when I had finally stopped replaying the driveway, the maple tree, the $300 in the envelope. But I'm also not interested in a relationship that only reactivates when there's something that requires my signature. That's exactly what happened, I said quietly. And we both know it. She was quiet. I love you, I said, because that was also true, in the complicated way that things can be true when love and grief and years have all tangled together into something that doesn't have a clean name. But love doesn't mean access. Not automatically. Not anymore. I told her I had to go. I wished her well and I meant it. I set the phone down on my desk and looked out the window at the March sky going gray. I was 40 years old. I had walked out a door 20 years ago with a box of clothes and $300 and a man I loved and absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I'd built something from that. Not because the story required me to, not because I had a montage moment or a turning point you could put in a movie, but because building is what you do when there's nothing else left and you're too stubborn to give up. That night, Wesley and I had dinner at home. Nothing special. Leftover soup, a bottle of wine we'd been saving for no reason. We sat at the kitchen table and he asked me how I was, and I thought about it honestly, the way he always made me feel I could. Good, I said, actually good. He smiled at me across the table. And the oak tree in the backyard was just starting to bud. And the soup was warm. And outside the city moved and didn't know or care about any of it. Which was exactly right. Family isn't the name on a trust document. It isn't the house you grew up in or the inheritance that was supposed to keep you in line. It's not the people who hand you a letter and $300 and call it a transition. It's the man who drove a moving truck when you had nothing. It's his aunt who pressed your hand at a courthouse and meant it. It's a sister who sends a card with no return address because love for her was always an act of courage. It's what you choose every day when the choosing is hard. That's the only kind that lasts. I've thought a lot about what my father expected to happen when he sat down across from me at that restaurant. I think he expected the 19-year-old, the one who stood in the kitchen holding her keys, who didn't fight back, who walked out quietly because she didn't yet know that quiet could be a form of strength instead of defeat. He expected someone he could still manage. He hadn't counted on 20 years. That's the thing nobody tells you about the long game. It doesn't feel like a game while you're living it. It just feels like Tuesday. Like studying for the LSET at a kitchen table in an apartment you can barely afford. Like calling Wesley from the law school library at 11 at night because first year is breaking you and you need to hear a voice that isn't afraid of your fear. Like passing the bar and not having anyone from your family of origin to call. You don't think in those moments that you're building something that will matter later. You're just trying to get through the week. But choices compound. That's what I've come to understand. Not in a mystical way. Just mathematically, practically. Every decision you make either builds capacity or erodes it. My father made decisions for 30 years that prioritized control over integrity, and each one made the next one easier, until he was a trustee quietly routing $800,000 through a shell company and telling himself it was just accounting. My grandfather trusted him completely, and he used that trust as a tool. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime treating people as instruments. You stop being able to see any other way. I made different choices, not because I was morally superior at 19. I wasn't. I was just stubborn and in love and unwilling to be managed. But stubbornness, when it's pointed in the right direction, becomes something else over time. It becomes a practice. I practiced just showing up. I practiced doing the work even when it was embarrassing to be a beginner. I practiced being honest with Wesley when I was scared, and letting him be honest with me. Those aren't dramatic choices. They don't make for a good montage, but they're the ones that built the life I was sitting inside of when my mother called. What I learned from Isabel's story, from my own story, is that integrity is not a single moment. It's not the speech you give or the signature you refuse or the line you draw in the sand. It's the 10,000 small decisions that happen before any of that. The ones no one sees. The ones that determine who you are when the moment finally arrives. My father had 20 years to choose differently. Every year he didn't was another year. The distance between who he was and who he could have been grew wider. And Fiona, quiet, careful Fiona, who sent a card with no return address because even love, for her, required protection. She chose too. She chose connection over compliance. slowly, in the only way she knew how. That matters. It counts. I'm not interested in punishing my parents. I genuinely mean that. The trust matter was never about revenge. It was about accuracy, about making the numbers tell the truth. What I wanted and what I got wasn't satisfaction at their expense. It was the simple, grounded feeling of having handled something correctly, of having used what I'd spent 20 years learning in exactly the situation it was built for. That's what resilience actually looks like, I think. Not toughness, not the ability to feel nothing. It's the ability to walk back into the room where you once had no power, sit down, and know completely, quietly, that the terms have changed.